Welcome back to the Happy Pharm Live podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different because this is actually a recording from a LinkedIn Live that I did with the empowered PharmD on her platform. And we talked about co-resident relationships. And afterwards, I thought the conversation was so good, I asked her if I could get a copy of the recording. So I cut it down into the top pieces of information that I think will help you with your co-resident relationships from our conversation. I hope you enjoy it and you find the information helpful.
Tell me about how your co-residents supported you through this whole thing and how important it is to have that kind of support system.
So I think I have to start by saying that I had incredibly great co-residents, and it did help that I'd actually met one of them prior. Like before we matched, we actually were in an interview together in Utah. We had applied to the same program and we went through quite the experience there. There was a huge snowstorm the day of our interview there. And we both had challenges getting to the hospital in this snowstorm because it was like a blizzard, like a whiteout blizzard on our interview day. And we ended up going to trivia the night before. So I got to know her, but we had no idea we were going to be co-residents. You know, it was like, okay, I saw this girl, maybe one, you know, we knew we were interviewing at one other place, you know, that we were both applying to. And that was that. I thought maybe that was going to be a good colleague to have in the future, but I never expected her to be my co-resident. And so we came in with at least somewhat knowing each other. We weren't complete strangers, but I had one PGY1 co-resident and a PGY2 co-resident. And so when we started out, it's like any new relationship, like you're just trying to get to know each other, right? Like you don't really know anything about this person other than you both like pharmacy. All of us like pediatrics. I knew Mackenzie, which was the PGY2, really liked oncology because that was what she was doing her PGY2 specialized in pediatrics in. And that's about the extent of what we do. You know, I knew
that's a pretty decent thing that you all have in common already. Like you don't have to like explain to another person like what it is that you're doing day to day. It's like, oh yeah, that happened again. And you can all relate. So I guess you already have like something truly amazing in common already.
Yeah. And I would say there's a lot of different specialties out there. And so I think for us, it was lucky that we all liked pediatrics because that's something you can bond over very easily. Like, why are we doing this? Why are we wanting to take care of kids specifically?
Yeah. Yeah. And so how did that friendship go? I guess before we even start, I don't know if this is a good time to ask you this, but I get a lot of people asking me like, can you talk about residency, co-residency relationships? Like, can you talk about making friends during that year? Why do you think people are so scared or like intimidated to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to have co-residency? We're going to be best friends. Like, why do you think they have so much like, I don't know, worries around that?
So I think there's two sides of it. I would say the less common side is the people come in with expectations and they're worried they're not going to be met. So they come in with the expectation that your co-resident is going to be your best friend and you're best friends for life. They're going to be in your wedding if you're not married yet. They're going to be there for your kids. They're going to be called aunt and uncle because they've heard people have that kind of relationship with their co-residents. They've seen people who are best friends. One of the people that was in the residency where I work, they are best friends. And one of the male coworkers were like a bridesmaid in her wedding or, you know, like, they are best friends and they do stuff together all the time. And so people sometimes come in with the expectation that that's what they want out of a co-resident is they want somebody who's going to be a best friend for life. And then I think on the other side, which is probably the more common side that people struggle with this, is they are hoping that they don't fall into the situation where they're co-resident and they hate each other. Like people are worried that they're going to get into residency and them and their co-resident are just not going to get along. They're going to hate the entire year because their co-resident and them don't get along at all. And they're fearful that they're going to have a bad experience with a co-resident. And I think some of that comes from people getting on that pharmacy residency Reddit and hearing the horror stories of having bad co-residents. But the reality is most people are going to fall somewhere in the middle, right? You're not going to be the best friend forever, but you're going to be colleagues, you're going to be cordial, and you're probably going to be friends afterwards. And I feel like that's where me and my co-residents kind of fall. We still have text conversations. We've bonded over all the stuff that Taylor Swift is doing still. We still reach out when there's like clinical questions. I frequently were like,
Mhm.
hey, my site is getting ready to start this. Has your site done this? What are you doing for this drug? Because all of us have some sort of pediatric oncology work that we do. So we have a lot of peds oncology questions that we bounce off each other still.
Okay.
But we're not talking every
Right.
single day. We're not, doing some of these best friend things that, some people are hoping that will come. So
Right.
I think a lot of it's just fear of either expectations not being met or we're going to hate each other.
So what is the most realistic expectation that people should come into their residency with? Like, what is that mindset?
I think just looking for somebody to be a colleague, especially in these
Mhm.
larger residency programs. So I was relatively small. There were three of us. Sometimes there's four in that residency program, but there was three that year. Going in, we had probably a closer relationship that some do because there was only three of us. But if you're in a larger program, you're looking for these as think of them first as networking opportunities. Like these are people that you're
Mhm.
going to be able to go back to, use as a resource in the future, hopefully a colleague that you'll see at conferences and be able to interact with. So trying to use it as a networking opportunity, think of them as like peers in the future because that's what they are. And then you can build friendships off of that because I've built friendships with other colleagues that I've networked with in other areas as well. But pharmacy residencies are a great networking opportunity, not just with your
Mhm.
co-residents, but the other pharmacists there. So I think starting there and then anything you get on top of that is bonus.
Very nice. Yeah, that's great. It's funny because I didn't have a resident or a co-resident. I was a resident, but I did not have a co-resident. My PGY1, I was the only resident there on my site. And then for PGY2, it's like, well, you're a PGY2 and like the other PGY1s are like hanging out with each other all the time. So you don't really get to like bond as much, or you don't really, you know, experience the same issues that they're having because you're doing different things. So it's funny because you're talking about the expectations, and I didn't really have an expectation going into residency because I'm like, I'm the only one, like, whatever, you know?
Mhm.
But I feel like sometimes it's good to just allow things to happen and not have these expectations because you never know. Like, now you're putting all this pressure on, like, what your friendships and relationships should look like. So tell me about, like, your bonding moments. Like, how do people kind of bond with their co-resident, and if it's not really happening yet for some of our folks who are listening, how do they start that, like, hey, tap on the shoulder, let's be friends? Like, I know that sounds so awkward. It's been a very long time since I've been like, hi, can we be friends? But I don't know, like, what is the right way to, not the right way, but what is like the less awkward way to do it?
I think that it's going to depend on the person too. And you have to realize that some people are going to be colleagues and they're never going to be your best friend just because your personalities are different. That happens.
Yeah.
That's okay too. But I still think it's important to build a relationship in some manner with them. So one of the things that my co-resident, my PGY1 co-resident and I bonded over was the training experience. So the first pharmacist that we got to work with, I'm not going to share names, of course, but she is known for being a stickler. Like everything has to be done a specific way and you follow the guide
Mm.
step by step exactly the way it's done. And, you're a scared little PGY1. You're like, I don't even have my license yet. Like, I'm just trying to like survive. I'm trying to study for the
Yeah.
Naplex every night for like 4 hours after I finish this. And so we kind of bonded over that relationship of just like, oh, well, you got this wrong, but I got this wrong. We both survived the day without her like getting too angry at us. So that was how we started. It just kind of getting that stress relief with each other and bonding over the shared experience. And I think that's something that all co-residents can at least understand is there's some shared experiences that you're having within the program and
Mhm.
bonding over those and just being there for the other person and like listening to what's going on with them and responding and just sharing your different stories.
Mhm.
The way our program worked is we actually had a shared rotation, which I think was great for our bonding experience because we were both on the pediatrics rotation at the same time. There were pieces of it that were different, and we had like certain topic discussions that were joint, and some of the stuff was separate because there were so many different peds floors that we could rotate through. But overall, we had time to get to know each other and how each other practiced and kind of find where my strengths lied and where her strengths lied and how we could help each other.
Yeah.
I think that is a huge thing that you can bond over, and if you want to build a relationship,
Yeah.
is going into it and finding how you guys can help and work with each other. So what is somebody really good at? I was good at the graphic design stuff because I had started the YouTube channel. I'd seen that. So when they were trying to make graphics, I showed them all my tools that we were using, and everybody started using Canva for our pretty graphics. So that was something I could help with and offer. Mackenzie, which was the PGY2, she was offering us advice for what to do in this program. And then I found that my co-resident was really good with the kids. Like, she was such a good person to educate the kids. Like, she
Aw.
had such the great demeanor. And so learning from her and watching her do those interactions, I was able to learn from her in that manner. And she had a lot of experiences that I didn't have. She had more PICU experience, so she helped me a lot on the PICU rotation. And we were just looking for ways to make the year easier on each other.
Oh, I love that.
And I think
Yeah, because it's
anybody
so
could do that.
easy. It's so easy to also, like, get in that mindset of comparing yourself against your
Mhm.
co-residents, I imagine, and I feel like that would be kind of a toxic way to develop that relationship. I think that I like what you said about figuring out what you're good at and what they're good at and learning from each other, because it could also be so easy to, I don't know, like, be like, "Ugh," and just kind of brush that off, and
Mhm.
yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
think that's a mistake that some people make, is they're looking at their co-residents as competition. Maybe everybody's thinking, oh, everybody wants to do a PGY2 and stay on and early commit, and there's not enough positions for all of us. But I think you have to think of it this way, is these are going to be your future colleagues, whether you're at that same location or not. And so trying to look at it from that lens versus this is my
Mhm.
competition, because you don't know. Everybody changes their
Mhm.
mind in residency. If you haven't, you'll probably will at some point on something that you had planned for your life, because residency is a very eye-opening experience. And so you might not be competition. And even if you are, you're all going to end up where is the best
Yeah.
fit for you. You're going to end up somewhere. You're going to end up with a job. So,
Yeah. 2
you
years
know,
down the road, you're not gonna remember, like,
mm-mm,
those little moments or, like, those, conflicts that you may have, so,
yeah.
just yeah. What were some difficulties, you think, interacting with your co-residents? Like, what would be some challenges that people would run into, and how would they address those things?
So I think everybody's stressed at baseline and residency. So being stressed out is going to increase your risk for conflict. People are not sleeping. People have a high workload. They're taking care of patients too that are very critical. It's hard, especially when we were in residency in a peds hospital. Like, it's hard to watch a patient pass away. And sometimes that's something
Yeah,
you're
that's
going through.
painful.
It's painful. So you're going through these painful experiences. Sometimes that's the first time you've done that. I worked at a children's hospital before, so I had a little bit of experience, but it was a different level of ownership when you become the
Mhm.
pharmacist in the room. And there were some instances where we had multiple casualties. So I was completely by myself in the ER. The other pharmacist was tending to other patients. And so there's a very different level of ownership that comes with being the resident and being the pharmacist taking care of those patients.
Mhm.
And those types of things just make it harder to build relationships in general, of any kind,
Mhm.
co-resident or not, or maintain relationships.
Yeah, maintain,
And
yeah.
so sometimes we said stuff to each other that wasn't nice because we were just tired and we were upset about
Mhm.
something completely different. And so it's also recognizing that you've done that and come back later and say, I'm sorry, like this, and this happened. I apologize for the way I said that, or I apologize for being aggressive, and just owning those types of things. When we also bonded over some of those difficult experiences, unfortunately, in my residency, both my co-resident and my PGY1 co-resident and I lost family members throughout the year.
Gosh,
And
okay.
so just being there for them during those difficult moments, like, what can I do to help offload your work so you can go
Yeah.
grieve? I mean, that became a thing. What can I do? Do I need to cover your weekend? Like, what do I need to do to help you? And then sometimes you're just not going to agree. You're different practitioners. You have different thoughts on how you want to handle stuff. And so when you're working together, you're going to have to go through some difficult conversations and figure out what's important to you, what do you fight for, and
Yeah.
go into a deeper conversation and what do you find a compromise for, and what do you do to stand your ground? Like, where do you stand your ground? Where do you give in? Where do you compromise? And that's just a learning experience that you're going to have regardless if you're in
Mhm.
residency or not, is
Yeah.
you're in that process of learning your clinical values and how you want to practice. So just remembering that you're both learning, you're both going through a challenging experience. And if they say something that's seems out of character, it's probably because they're just exhausted and saw something difficult, and
Yeah.
try to remember those things. It's hard.
It's hard. You gotta give each other grace for sure. I mean, I know when I talk about preceptor and learner conflicts, I'm like, give each other grace. The preceptor needs to give the learner the grace and the other way around. And I think that's the same with anybody that you work with. I think that dealing with co-residents is almost like a precursor to learning how to manage and handle colleagues' conflicts, because whatever you learn from your residency, you're going to be able to apply that to a regular job. And guess what? In a regular job, you're going to have a lot of conflicts with the people that you work with. And maybe learning how to handle those types of challenges in residency will help you way more than, like if you have an intimidating colleague. Maybe you had a difficult co-resident that you work with now, and like learning how to handle them. So then when you go into a real workplace and now you're full-time pharmacist, or like, practicing on your own, now you know how to handle some of those things. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this, because this is something that I have experienced as a preceptor, is seeing that sometimes when co-residents maybe bond a little bit too much, and I don't know what that even means, but they almost like they like become this group that's like against. I almost feel like they've kind of like bonded together, and now they're kind of like, we are against everybody in a way, like, maybe that's not like the right description of it, and it's hard for me to describe it, but it's like I feel like you guys are such a close-knit group that like the rest of the pharmacy department can't really like get in there and start being friends with y'all, because everybody's just so close and they're always together and they're always doing things. So like I never really get to know them one-on-one, or like build any relationship with them individually as preceptor, as a colleague to the resident. I'm curious to know what your thoughts on that would be, because there is this one aspect where people are like bonding over hard experiences and they're working through that, but then they also kind of ignore the fact that we also have this whole pharmacy department that you guys should also be interacting with as well. Like, we're all technically colleagues here, we're all part of this pharmacy department. What do you think about that?
So I have two thoughts. The first is coming from the preceptor side. So as a preceptor myself now, I go out of my way to introduce myself to the residents, because I'm an elective. Like, investigational drug service isn't required. I know a lot of them won't ever be on my service, and I may be working with them in a more ancillary role, maybe like helping with a project that relates to something that, IDS is involved in. But I want them to know that I am there, and I go out of my way to talk to them when I see them. If I see them one-on-one in the hallway, I walk with them. Like, let's walk, to wherever you're going. You're walking to the cafeteria. Hey, I'm heading that same direction. Like, let's have a quick conversation. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me as a preceptor, I think it's important for us to reach out to those residents and find opportunities to connect with them and build those relationships, because they're in the most uncomfortable spot. This is where I work. This is where I live. I have a home. I'm making a decent salary. I'm not struggling to eat. That is a real situation in some residencies, depending on what the salary is, especially now that we've seen inflation and the rates of resident salaries have not gone up. So I do know that, especially with the student loans coming in, there's going to be more people struggling with basic needs than we've seen in the past, I believe, at least in the past few years. And so I know they're struggling. So in my idea from a preceptor is like, let me make it easier on them to build the relationship. So in a couple of months after they've been here, they will look to me to start reaching out, and they will want to build that relationship on their own. Now, I know that that's not going to be available to everyone. So looking at it from the resident side is, once again, this is a networking opportunity. This is an opportunity for you to get to know other people. And while it's great to have a bonded experience with your co-residents, your preceptors are not out to get you. Like, that is not true. It may feel that way sometimes. You're getting difficult feedback, and especially if you're an overachieving student, you may not have gotten critical feedback before, or very much of it. And this is probably the first time you're getting that difficult feedback. And it requires you to kind of switch your mindset a little bit and this is hard, and I struggled with it just as anyone else, but you were there in residency to learn. This is a learning opportunity. And every piece of advice somebody gives or feedback that they give you on something to change is an opportunity for you to get better that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't done a residency. You're not getting that same level of critical feedback from your managers or anybody you work with after residency, because they're not on the front lines with you and they're not seeing everything you're doing. So this is really the opportunity for you to be the best pharmacist you can be. And you can continue to build those relationships because those are the same colleagues that you can go back to when you're practicing and you're the NICU pharmacist or you're the ER pharmacist. If you have those relationships built, those are colleagues that you can use as resources in the future when you do need help, when you do need that second opinion, or you're building a service that you know already existed, you can reach out to them and figure out how it was done. And so you have to think about it in that sense of like, what is this going to do for my career? And your co-residents are great, but your preceptors, we do a lot of this work. And yes, we're getting paid to help with precepting, but when you're precepting, you're also usually staying late and you're not getting paid for that. You're doing work at home. Sometimes you're not getting paid for that. So your preceptors are sacrificing a lot that you probably don't see to teach you. And they do really care, even though maybe sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And so you have to think about like what is going on their side and what they're doing to try to help you grow as a resident.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that when residents are starting in their new program, that yes, like making friends with your co-residents are going to be a really great experience. You guys are doing so many things together, you're growing together, but you have to also realize and make sure you prioritize that you are blending yourself in with the rest of the pharmacy department, because that's going to make such a huge difference in your career moving forward. Like, who can you ask for to write that letter of recommendation? You can't ask your co-residents to write your letter of recommendations. And just like getting networked with other people in the pharmacy field. Like, you are now part of the profession and you are one of us. Even though you are a resident, you are a licensed professional. And it's time to think outside of like, oh, we are just this group of young kids like growing together. Like, you are, but you're also part of the pharmacy department. So I would suggest that means make conversations too, bond with your coworkers, bond with your preceptors. They're also wanting to like get to know you. So bond with your preceptors, bond with the people that you're working with, bond with the nurses, the social workers, like everybody that's in that building, because that's how you grow as a professional. Like, yes, you're learning your clinical skills, but you're also learning what it's like to be a healthcare provider. And don't lose sight of that is something that I really want to mention and talk about. I had to definitely learn that because I was the only resident in the program. So I had to build relationships with my coworkers and like talk to them and like, just all of those things. And some of my favorite people are nurses to work with and to talk to, and the social workers and everybody. So don't forget that you're also part of the pharmacy department. So that means, hey, maybe show up to that potluck, or hey, like, create an event and like invite everybody to the department or whatever, or invite everybody in the department to go to that event or whatever. But don't focus solely on just you as like this single group as part of this department. Like, you guys are all part of it now. So that's something that I really do want to talk about, because I find that to be very important. And not a lot of people talk about it because so much focus is on that co-resident relationship. But do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple things to add that I thought of as you were saying that. So first is also the pharmacy technicians. Be friends with the pharmacy technicians. I don't know how many times they saved my rear on rotations where I was like, I don't know how to do this operational thing. Let me text this, like message the technician that's like on that floor today, or I know is downstairs that like can help me with this, because they're your colleagues too. And my co-resident and I, that's one thing, we like built relationships with them early on. And I'm still friends with some of those technicians that were in my residency program. They are like great human beings and they're such a good asset to the team. So not just, you mentioned like nurses and social workers and the pharmacists, but also those other people. Like, we were friends with the people who came and cleaned the desk and our like be friends with those people too. Like, everybody in there, we're all on the same mission to help the patient. So that's one thing. The other
Yes.
thing is, you may stay on as a pharmacist after residency. So, building those relationships, those are going to be the people who interview you. Those are then going to be your coworkers. And so, it's a much smoother transition into pharmacist world, like into that pharmacist life, if you've built a relationship with them
Mm,
before, because they're going to know you. They're going to have some trust built with you, and you're going to be able to build off of that when you step into that staffing role or that clinical specialist role, whatever it is after graduation from your residency program.
mhm. Exactly. Very, very true, honestly. I think some of the techs that I've worked with, like, they're so awesome, and they're even just more fun than pharmacists sometimes, not gonna lie.
Mhm.
Um, well, thank you, Sierra. I don't wanna take too long, in terms of this live because I feel like we've answered a lot of really great you've answered a lot of really great questions, and we've touched on a lot of really good topics. I guess final thoughts on my end would be to not have these unrealistic expectations, kind of like what Sierra was saying. Like, they may not be your bridesmaid or groomsman or whatever, and that's okay. That is just part of life. That is just part of colleagues and coworkers and all of that. So know that. And then the other part of it is you you're a resident and maybe you're not getting paid as much and maybe you're still in that training mode, but you're also part of the pharmacy department now. You are an employee,
Mhm.
you deserve the same respect, the same rights, but you also need to put yourself out there just as everybody is in that kind of workspace. So don't close yourself off. Don't just keep to yourself because you do need that support system so much. I do want to tell a story considering that I was the only resident my site. I know I said that like 6 times during this live, but needs to be reminded. Um, but I was at this smaller hospital, and I knew we had a sister hospital at a different city, I guess, but it was still drivable. So I was told like, hey, reach out to this person. So guess what? Like I did. I wanted that support system. I wanted that group of people that I can go to like ask for help or whatever. So I remember emailing one of the residents at the other site, just like, I've never met them before, but I'm just gonna put out this email like, hi, I'm Sue. I'm new to the city. I'm doing, PTRI1 here. I know that you guys are sister site with us, and I might be going over there for a couple of things. So blah 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 blah. I would really like to know you, and just send out that email. And I mean, they could. It was like a very, like, I don't know how to describe it. It was like kind of like stressful in a way because you're like, oh my gosh, what if they think I'm weird for doing that or whatever? But that moment of discomfort led to a lot of like experiences with those co-residents because they're like, oh sure, like come have dinner with us here and whatever. And even though I don't see
Mhm.
them all the time, like it was so nice for them to invite me to these events anyways. And it's like, put yourself out there, guys. Like it's okay. It's that one moment of discomfort, and if they reject you, they like never respond, it's okay because now you can move on and do other things. But don't let that moment of discomfort discourage you from, putting yourself out there. So, what are your last thoughts, Sierra?
I would completely agree with that. And the other thing I would add to that, and you kind of hinted here, is you can make the first move if you really want to build those relationships. You should not expect somebody else to do that for you. You're going to have to put yourself out there and be uncomfortable and be the one, if you want that kind of relationship, you have to be the one to say, let's go grab dinner or maybe
Mm,
plan something with your co residents if you want to see that happen. And it'll be worth it in the end, one way or
yeah,
another, because you'll either figure out that this person is somebody you want to continue to build a friendship with, or you're going to find that they're going to be a colleague and that's okay. And you can have a professional relationship with them at work and maybe branch out and find somebody
yeah.
else to be your friend in that city outside of that. I was friends with some of the pharmacy students because I had met them previously. We were in the same district for APHA. And so I was still friends with them. So sometimes I just wanted to have friends that were outside of work, that we did not
Mhm.
talk about work when we were outside of work. So I would do that as well. So you
Yeah.
can have both types of friendships or relationships, and that's okay. But if you want to build a more friendship, you might have to go out of your way and put in some effort in order to get some
Yeah.
of that relationship building to happen.
Yeah, moving to a different state or a different place can be really challenging when you're young, but it's also so much fun. Like, I look back at that year when I was in Indiana and I was like, wow, I've grown so much. I wouldn't have grown that much if I didn't step out of my comfort zone and move. So go ahead and do it, guys.
Wasn't that conversation so good? I hope you gathered a lot of great tips to help you build relationships with your co-residents and really use it as a networking opportunity as you continue to grow in your career. As always, thank you for watching or listening, and until next time, keep on living your happy pharm life. Bye!